Good evening. Welcome to the Spiritual But Not Religious Show. I'm your host, George Lewis. I've got a really great guest tonight. I have Andrew Flaxman will be coming on the show. Andrew, bright guy, was introduced to me by Deb Scott, who I interviewed several months back. We've kind of become friends, and she has a talk show she does on Blog Talk Radio. For those of you who remember Deb, she wrote a book called The Sky is Green and the Grass is Blue and was a great guest here. Andrew was a successful stockbroker and financial advisor on Wall Street. And he actually graduated cum laude from Princeton. He got a master's degree in religion at Rutgers, highly educated man, has a whole really different spin on spirituality. I had never really come across this before. Very, very interesting. So I'm glad you're here with me tonight, and I think you'll enjoy Andrew a lot. Julie, we have Andrew on the phone?
Yes, we do.
Okay, you want to bring him in? Hello, Andrew. Are you able to hear me good?
Hello, George. Yes, I can hear you fine.
Andrew, I want you to know, I just did the introduction and all that, and I want you to know that I'm just really impressed with your work. I've been doing this spirituality thing for the better part of 37, 38 years, something like that. I've been doing this show for about 3 years, and you really bring a whole different spin to spirituality than really I'd ever thought about or ever heard. And it just really makes a great deal of sense. Well, but we'll get into that a little later on. You actually graduated from Princeton with a degree in religion. Is that correct?
A degree in religion and ancient history.
And then you went on for a master's degree at Rutgers.
Yes, in business and accounting.
And what were you doing in your spare time? I'm going to get Julie to change the screen so that you're also okay. There we go. What did you do in your spare time there, Andrew?
I was just trying to make as much money as I could. I knew when I started out that I didn't want to end my career in business, but I wanted to make a lot of money. That was my only objective. And
so you headed for Wall Street?
I headed for Wall Street. I worked on Wall Street for about 14 years.
And what did you do there?
First I was a security analyst. I would interview the automobile companies in Detroit, and then I became a stockbroker, and then a venture capital person.
Oh, you were into venture capital. Okay, so you were a real shark.
Yes.
Absolutely. That something happened for you while you were a stockbroker that kind of changed your life. You had kind of a spiritual experience, didn't you?
Yes, I had I went through a very difficult time with a marriage that was very bad, and I was in deep meditative state when a friend of mine said, "Well, you should read Rudolf Steiner." And I picked up a book about Rudolf Steiner, and I saw that he was Christ-centered.
Yes.
I am Jewish, and even though I saw that Steiner was a very brilliant man, the fact that he was Christ-centered was not for me. So I dropped the book, and then a year later I picked it up again, and it was Steiner quoting Goethe.
Right.
That was, for me, was like St. Paul at Damascus, on the road to Damascus. He said that, Goethe said, that if you don't learn how to get rid of your prejudices, if you don't learn how to see things just the way they are, just the way the sun shines on everything and everybody, your life will be embittered and filled with errors. And for some reason or other, that caused a change in my consciousness, that passage. So for the next year, I gave that passage to all my friends, and it didn't mean a damn to anybody.
I understand that. Well, what did you do with that passage? Did you have some kind of a special way to use that, or did it just kind of break open your consciousness where you began to view things differently?
It just broke open my consciousness, and then I continued reading the book, and I saw that I was a spiritual being.
Right.
And that I had been reincarnated before.
So you got into past lives.
I got into past lives immediately, and then
tell us how the story of that. How did you get into the past? Because that's very interesting to come from being a stockbroker, a financial advisor, totally into money, self-centeredness, no doubt.
Yeah.
How did you get from A to B with that?
Well, when I was in high school, when I was in junior high school, I identified with a historical figure, not a very pleasant figure, not a very nice figure, but I would kid friends and they would kid me using that name.
Uh-huh.
But at that time I didn't believe in reincarnation at all. I didn't like anything Eastern oriented. I didn't care for it one bit. And then when I was at Princeton, I had an automatic writing experience where I wrote the most brilliant paper that I've ever written and that the professor had ever read. And that's why I was able to graduate with honors at Princeton.
So you were connected to that something deeper inside of you.
Yes, all of a sudden I opened up to the details of ancient Greece.
Ah.
Without having studied it at all. And at the time, I didn't make head or tail of it. It didn't make any sense to me at all, and I didn't think about it at all. And then years later, I started to identify with some other figure in the past, and again, didn't make head or tail of that, didn't mean anything to me at all. And then when I picked up the Steiner, that's then what triggered all of this rethinking.
So when you picked Steiner back up, you were obviously able to kind of set aside his Christian beliefs and glean the other that he had to say. He was really a genius.
He was a polymath, and I thought I could make a fortune promoting him. He was unknown in this country completely.
Uh-huh.
He was not so well known in Europe where he lectured. He wrote 60 books and gave 6,000 lectures, and I figured, gee, anybody would be interested in this kind of output, even if it was a nonsense and junk.
Well, I think he had kind of a reputation for being into the occult also, did he not?
Yes, and even that word, has very bad connotations.
A lot of baggage with that word.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, especially, what's interesting, because his viewpoint on Christianity was a far cry from what fundamentalist churches teach about Christianity.
Yes, well, the major difference was that Steiner promoted getting in touch with your spiritual self. That is your own spiritual insights. And then that's your starting point. And then you go back to the Bible, or you go to the Bhagavad Gita, and you go to whatever you want to go to, and then you'll start to see things differently because you'll be seeing them from a higher point of view, from your spiritual self.
You could read even the same page or the same passage, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, did I read this before? And there's something totally new there for you.
So and you start to understand that Christianity has not really begun yet. I mean, it was Thoreau said that too, that Christianity is a way of life and a way of being, and it's more than people can handle now. And 2,000 years ago, people couldn't understand it. Even the disciples couldn't understand it very well.
Absolutely. I had a wonderful guest on here a couple of weeks ago who had been a Carmelite nun for 8 years and deep meditation, and she now is in, still with the into that end of her life, or Catholicism, but also embraces metaphysics and all of the newer thought, the kind of thing that you're into. And she is such a wonderful soul. Maybe one of the first real Christians I've ever met, along with what you're saying. So maybe there's a breakthrough coming here, hopefully.
Yes, I would say so. And of course, what keeps people from Christianity, or has people leave Christianity, is that the history of Christianity is really the history of anti-Christianity.
Totally, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, when you go back and look in history and you see that it was Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, and when you see what really went on there, you start to realize what actually happened.
Yes, and of course the main thing, Christianity at the beginning was really quite fantastic. People went by their experiences, spiritual experiences. Now, for example, in baptism, that was an actual immersing your head in water, and then you'd have a near-death experience, so that you'd experience the spiritual world in baptism. Now, of course, that's very different than just having it as some sort of ritual or dogma.
Completely different. Well, I think, in what you're talking about when you talk about having that experience of God or your spirituality or whatever, that really is one of the primary characteristics of mystics and mysticism.
Yes.
Is that inner experience.
Yes. Now, what Steiner does is take mysticism one step further and makes it scientific. So what you get with Steiner is really instruction as to how to turn you onto yourself.
Right.
Yourself. Now, of course, the trouble with Steiner is that he's so deep and so enormous that you get lost in Steiner, which is not the point to any of these great thinkers. The point was not to get lost in them, but to do what they did and get in touch with your spiritual self.
Well, you see, that was my experience with Steiner. I found him really good to read, but at the same time, it was like you say, it was really easy to get lost. I had to really work at reading Steiner. It didn't come, it didn't flow real naturally for me.
Well, that's why, not just you. I learned after about a year of trying to promote Steiner, I saw that he couldn't be promoted directly. You had to really go about promoting him, and it's not really him, promoting his attitude about life. You had to do it indirectly, and that's when I got these professors together to develop a liberal arts program that was based on showing how Emerson and Thoreau and Rembrandt and Plato, they all had these experiences too.
Well, of course, Emerson was really, Emerson probably, of all the names you named, we would see as somebody who was really involved with spirituality.
Yes.
And Thoreau. Whereas some of the other people that you talk about, Rembrandt and so forth, when I heard you, I listened to one of your interviews, and when I heard you talking about that, I was like, oh, wow, I had never thought about that.
Now, Rembrandt you can use to meditate. You can just take a look at his paintings, and you can actually get to a higher level of consciousness through just meditating on these paintings. Now, Rembrandt, according to Steiner, was the reincarnation of the patriarch Jacob.
Oh, really?
Now, for me, I can understand that because Jacob taught, he had a religious, spiritual attitude. But by the time he got to be Rembrandt, there's no writing or no preaching with Rembrandt, just through his art.
Right.
So you can start to appreciate the spirituality of Rembrandt as another form of bringing spirit to humankind.
Are you able to put that in some kind of a visual image for us so that the folks that are watching tonight can really grasp that? Because that's pretty much of a foreign concept for most of us.
Well, to everybody, all liberal arts is really foreign to people in terms of really turning you on to your own spirit.
Right.
As you say, Emerson was somebody who, yes, he's taught at the schools, but of course he's taught very dryly and through his dogma and doctrines, and not according to what his advice to everybody was. Same with Plato. But Rembrandt, in terms of the visuals, we have courses, very short courses in each of these figures. And with Rembrandt, it's just about 14 pages, and it just tells you about these different paintings of his and shows you what you can make of them. And also in Rembrandt's own life. Now, Rembrandt starts off with the spirit depicted as light shining on the paintings.
Uh-huh.
But by the time of the late Rembrandt, you see the light shining from within.
That's very interesting.
So you can see just in his treatment of light and darkness, you can see what he was teaching in terms of spirituality.
So what I'm hearing is that he actually was going through a transformative experience himself through his, and it was showing itself through his art.
Yes, yes, very much so. And you can see it in the art very, very clearly. Now, for instance, the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp, which is early Rembrandt, he made his reputation on that painting. There you see spirit presented in a sort of an outer form. You see the light shining on these different figures, but you also see the elevation, the different elevation of the figures that is presented. First of all, you have the dead body, so you know that what death is, and then you see the teacher is filled with wisdom, and so that's the light, and then you see different levels of the different thinking of the different students, 7 different students, all at different levels. You have an intellectual level with a document in his hand looking at us, because that's the intellectual level.
Right.
So you see, Rembrandt does that in every one of his paintings that he where it just wasn't for money.
So he paints in metaphor.
Yes. And also Rembrandt's own life was a testament to this. I mean, he had great losses. He lost his wonderful wife. He lost his son. And so you see the pain in his self-portraits. You can see the spiritual development of Rembrandt himself through his self-portraits.
That's interesting, because it's been said that spirituality is really or pain is the touchstone to spirituality.
Yes, and you can see it in Rembrandt. And then, of course, you can also see it, hear it in music. Now, we use Mozart and Beethoven.
Right.
Now, there it's very interesting, because Mozart was almost like a channel for spirit. So when he woke up in the morning, he would just write his the music.
When you say channel, he's almost like a channeler or a medium,
yes,
as far as music, isn't he?
Yes, and there are no corrections to speak of in his manuscripts.
Right.
With Beethoven, who came very soon afterwards, they were alive at the same time. Beethoven, you see all of these different changes in his music, all sorts of corrections. And Beethoven, you can tell his life from his music. Mozart, you can't. Mozart was completely channeled. You know, that was all right from the spirit.
Mozart was kind of a childish character too, was he not?
Yes. So his personality had nothing to do with his music.
Right. Do you think the childishness kind of allowed for that to come through him without having that critical parent to stop all of that?
Yes, but then at the time of Beethoven, you have the ego immersed in the music and the writing, the creative process. So Beethoven is the more modern of the two.
Uh-huh.
And this is what we have to learn how to do, not to be like Mozart or like Edgar Cayce and go to sleep and get all of the spiritual information. We have to learn how to do this consciously. So Beethoven is sort of like that. And, of course, somebody like Rembrandt is like that. These are really very important people to know about and to study, but not to get lost in them.
I've spent the latter half of my life doing exactly what you're talking about, getting connected at that inner level and following that spirit. And it will take you places that I don't think that we could even dream up.
That's right. Now, Shakespeare is very interesting in that regard, because Shakespeare, you can also do what you do with Rembrandt, and you can trace his spiritual growth from his early plays to The Tempest, which is really a mystery play. That's a play that's very, very deep, and people don't understand that about The Tempest. But then King Lear is about the ego experience and the death experience.
Right.
So you can do the same thing with Shakespeare.
Shakespeare was kind of a spiritual master, was he not?
They all were.
Yeah. It was easier for me to see Shakespeare in that position, but until, like I hear your work, and that kind of opened my eyes a lot, really. It's made me want to follow up on, the things that you're talking about, and I will.
Well, that's the shame of liberal arts. Liberal arts should liberate us. Liberal arts should be able to free us from our preconceived notions. It should be able to wake us up. But of course, for the past 500 years, liberal arts has put us to sleep.
Well, that's our big challenge, isn't it? To stay open.
Yes.
We get some knowledge, and it's pretty easy to fall into what you were talking about earlier, the ego, and then we close down. We shut off. We know too much.
Yes. Now, what I've learned to do is to have sense-free experience, to realize that you are not your body, and pure thought is not really related to your body. Now, for instance, when I say pure thought, the concept of a circle is the same for everybody in the whole world, no matter what your race, religion, or culture is.
Right.
But as soon as you draw a circle, of course, that's all independent. So, and it's all personal and all different. So that's your pathway to spirit is through pure thought. And the pure thought of yourself is not who you are as this particular person in this particular life. It's the idea of yourself, your really ideal self. That's your real self, and that's what you have to get more and more in touch with.
Well, you know, Andrew, my experience, personal experience with that has been, you know, what's happened for me on my spiritual path is, you know, I guess early on I thought there was some kind of magic wand or pixie dust or whatever, and there would be some magical experience at the end of it. But for me, and for some there may be, for me it's been kind of a journey like you just described, is, you know, like allowing more than anything else.
Yes.
And following that inner guide.
Yes.
That inner voice. Do you channel entities? You get into the guide aspect that some of the metaphysical or the New Age movement do, or you mentioned automatic writing, which makes me ask that question.
No, that's the only time I've ever had that experience. I've had tremendous different spiritual experiences. For me, I just have them, and then it proves to me that there is such a thing, and there is this is part of reality that we close off to. But for myself, no, I'm a very practical person and very much a worldly person, and I play the piano, and that's how I meditate, by playing the piano. And also, I say the Lord's Prayer every day, and I meditate on the opening words of the Gospel of St. John, because I believe we all can get in touch with the Logos.
Right.
The Logos is that spirit, that spiritual self. That's the Holy Spirit, and you can get in touch with that.
It must get in touch with that, I think.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, that's what life is all about. To learn, and that's also related to what love is. Love, light, and the Logos are all very closely connected.
Well, I'd say you'd have to have a pretty open mind, Andrew, to come from a Jewish background with the religious training that you had to where you're finding St. John to be an enlightening figure for you.
Well, I used to think that, but less so all the time, because after all, these people were all Jewish, very Jewish.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I find myself very, very tuned in with all of these people, and I used to think that St. Paul was some sort of a mental case, and then, of course, after I had these experiences, I saw that no, St. Paul was extremely versed in Judaism, and was really quite a Jewish initiate. And then he then had this experience of the Christ in the what I call the etheric world.
Yes.
And that's what transformed St. Paul.
So you're a very practical guy, and I really appreciate that. Does that mean in your practicality that you exclude the channeling and all of that end of it as, I know it's not practical, but as not being valid?
No, I don't look at it that way at all, and I don't exclude it for that reason. I exclude it because the process is so important.
Right.
The process has to be fully awakened, and that's why in reading Edgar Cayce, I've never seen anything that he wrote that wasn't right on. So the information is fantastic with education.
Absolutely.
But the process is not what we should be striving for. We should be striving for his kind of insights through fully conscious behavior.
See, I'm very much in that same quadrant with you on that. You know, I tried the channeling. I've done quite a bit of automatic writing, and I found the process. You know, I was getting the information and I was getting the experience, but I also found, like you said, that process really wasn't necessary for me. Yes,
and also once you start to understand this, you really have to first get in touch with your own spiritual self. After all, your spiritual self is a much more important being than your normal self is. So why should you try and go to any of these other entities, and even God, when you first have to get in touch with your spiritual self? I mean, that's the closest to you, so why shouldn't you start there and then take that step by step as far as you can go?
Well, you know, it's been said that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And, you know, I meditated and really contemplated with that for quite a long time, and it occurred to me, if that be so, and I'm quite sure it is, then I needed to focus more on my human experience and bring it into the spiritual realm.
Yes, that's exactly what I've been doing all my life.
Yeah.
And by the way, what that entails, though, is something very difficult. Money is very, very important part of being human. You need money to live and exist. And so, you know, I grew up in a little town that was a mansion. Was my neighbor built a mansion during the Second World War. And he was a mafia hitman.
Uh-huh.
In the mansion with him, living with him, was his brother, the priest. So my object in life is to try and get these two opposites really together.
Bring them into balance.
Together. You don't have to kill for a living, and then give to charity, which is also what people do when they're.
You got a phone going off somewhere,
I'll shut that off.
I often forget that myself, so I thought at first it was me, Andrew. Sorry, we didn't warn you on that.
Well, I'm sorry. I should have known that.
I just wonder, was that call coming from your spirit?
I won't know until we're finished with this interview.
Absolutely, right.
But anyway, one of my goals in life is to really bring these two together. That is, so to do spiritual work and make a living at the same time in the same area. And so that's why I have a very fine group of mentors that have come together with me who can then mentor others. And by the way, nobody learns better than a teacher.
Absolutely.
So this is part of the whole process, is to become familiar with this material and then turn around and mentor others in it.
Well, let's talk a bit about what you have going there, because I think it's very unique and very interesting. And in the process, tell us, our viewers, what your website is. But what you've done, Andrew, is you have brought together really mentors, coaches, whatever you'd like to call them. You call them mentors. But
mentors are live people who can help you with the masters of our civilization. That's what I brought together with the help of, I couldn't have done this myself, with the help of very fine faculty people. So we brought together things like the Bhagavad Gita and Vedic information and Da Vinci and, as I said, Emerson, Plato. So it's a total of, there are 32 different courses on the website now, all not intellectual, all trying to take the intellectual and to combine the brain thinking with heart thinking. So basically we teach people how to think with your heart, which is another way of saying get in touch with your spiritual self. Because your brain is, the world is controlled by brain people, very clever, very, very quick-minded, but this is not really, this is only half a person. You have to bring heart with the brain, and then combine the two, and you use these organs. You are not these organs. You are not your brain. You're not your heart, but you're the spiritual entity that uses these organs.
So how do we get from Wall Street and the Ayn Rand selfish self-centeredness to that aspect where that's where everything about us is really dominating us? How do we get from there to here? Is that, I mean, how many people really get that voluntarily? What you were talking about early on, you had a painful experience that kind of pushed you into to your path at this point. Do you think it takes that? I'm not sure everybody has to come that way, but
I'm afraid everybody does, because wisdom is crystallized pain.
Oh boy, that's a nice way to put it. Absolutely.
What wisdom consists of, and now if you haven't had it in this lifetime, you've had it in other lifetimes. That's why reincarnation is also very, very important to understand.
So tell me, one of the things that I've been watching and think probably is going on when you talk about crystallized pain, you know, the world is in a place now that we've never really been economically, and we're really so connected. The United States is in, you know, like a lot of difficulties. Europe's in a lot of difficulties. A lot of people losing their homes, losing their jobs, no way to go. They're in a lot of pain. Do you think that maybe this is kind of a segue into a transformation?
There's no question in my mind. And if you look at history, which I'm a history buff, I mean, I love history.
Yes,
and
me too.
If you really love history and understand history, you see that you can't have substantial transformation without great pain, because after all, who would give up on their own the pleasures of life?
Well, if everything's going great, don't bother me.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it takes some unusual people. Now, St. Francis was a person like that. I mean, he was very wealthy family, a very wealthy father, and he gave up all of those riches to become a saint.
I work at living my life by the St. Francis prayer.
Oh.
I find that really powerful. He was the world's true rebel.
Yes, and I had a thrill. We went to Italy 5 years ago and went to where the cell of St. Francis, which was near Assisi, but it wasn't Assisi.
It's out in the hills, isn't it?
Yeah, it was empty, and such a beautiful sight. And it was before he had his revelations, but during a time when he was in solitude. But I got a thrill out of that because I have a high regard for St. Francis now, too.
I think the Catholic Church made him a saint because they didn't know what to do with him.
That's right.
And the other thing is, if they make you a saint, people aren't going to follow you and do what you do.
That's right.
And they lost complete control of St. Francis.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, the prayer of St. Francis is wonderful. The prayer that I use, however, is the Lord's Prayer.
I use both.
Now, when I was a child, when I was at grammar school, I had to say the Lord's Prayer every single day. That was how the day started. This was in New Jersey.
Right.
And my parents, of course, weren't at all attuned to this, and nor was I, so we didn't know this was supposed to be a Christian prayer. Of course, now I see it's a real Jewish prayer because it was Jesus Christ as a Jewish person who advised people to use that prayer.
It's amazing how we lost that reality, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, it's like some kind of a weird twist of fate there that would happen. It's insane, really.
Well, actually understandable, because the Jewish religion, the Jewish people, they were chosen to be able to be strong enough so that the heritage could stand a person strong enough to get the logos inside of himself. And by the way, if you look at what I'm saying very carefully in the Bible, you see this very clearly, that with Abraham, this was his fantastic imagination that God was invisible, and you shouldn't have idols. Now, then Moses comes along, And Moses can see the divine in the burning bush, and then when he's asked, well, who should he say sent him, God answers him, I am.
Right.
I am is so important. That's this indwelling logos, the I amness that we all have. So then Moses himself couldn't quite make it. So Moses himself couldn't get it. But then the prophets said that also, just be quiet and listen to that indwelling presence. And in Jeremiah 31:4, he says there'll come a time, there'll be a new covenant where there won't be any priests, rabbis, or ministers. Everybody will have God inscribed in himself, and you won't need anybody to tell you that.
I think that's essential.
Yes, and then of course comes Jesus Christ as the first person. And by the way, you needed 2 Jesus babies to get this powerful entity. Because if you read the Gospels carefully, you'll see that there are 2 different genealogies, and there are 2 different nativity stories. So when I was growing up, I thought that this was the biggest fraud perpetrated on mankind, where the priests weren't even smart enough to get rid of these contradictions.
Absolutely.
But then when you see, when you realize that this is what it took an introvert and an extrovert. It took a priest, a line, and a kingly line, and then they had to merge. And you see this at the bar mitzvah of Jesus. You see him changing into one person. From 2 different Jesuses, it becomes one. And that explains how the parents of Jesus didn't even recognize their own son when they came back. They had left him at the temple. They came back, and they didn't recognize him. He was busy teaching the rabbis.
Well, isn't that the process of integration that we all must go through?
Yes, exactly.
Each of us. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And then so by the time of the baptism, that's when the logos, because even then, the two Jesuses merged, that wasn't even enough. You had to get something even further developed, and that's what happened during the time where Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, and then at 30 years old, the logos came inside Jesus. Jesus gave up his own ego, his own individuality, and took on the logos. And then St. John, not the Baptist, St. John the Beloved, he was then initiated himself by Jesus Christ, and that was the importance of the raising of Lazarus. And by the way, that's the other thing that I've learned. What is an initiate, and what is it to be initiated? That's very, very important. That should not be a secret. People should understand that concept.
Well, that was about power, wasn't it? Holding power?
Yes, that's what it was. But when you realize what an initiate is, you realize that everything has to be initiated. Agriculture.
Everything.
Everything has to be started, has to be begun in this world, in the material world, and that's what an initiate does. An initiate is trained to initiate things. And that's why we use Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin was, I think, the greatest initiate amongst the founding fathers. He was after all,
he was in a league all his own. There's no question about that.
His own, and his life is a testament to just the process that I'm talking about.
So do you think Franklin, he was quite a womanizer. You think there was a stage in his, because I'm not sure I know, a stage in his life where that changed?
Well,
where he made that, that transition?
First of all, to be an initiate does not mean to be perfect.
Absolutely. Boy, that's for sure.
So Franklin was not perfect, but Franklin was a real major figure. We would not have our country today without Benjamin Franklin.
Without question.
That was how important he was. And by the way, that's why we use, a lot of the figures that we use were Freemasons. Now, Mozart, quit the Catholic Church and became a Freemason.
Well, I heard you say that, and that was the first that I realized that he did that. Of course, Freemasons have taken a real, they've taken a real beating around conspiracy theories and all that kind of thing.
Yes.
And also being connected with actually having been the Knights of the Knights Templar.
Yes, yes. The Freemasons have a fantastic history, and the Freemasons are really a fantastic group. But like everything else, you still get too group-oriented, and it's too much ritual. But it's a wonderful, wonderful group with marvelous figures throughout history that were initiated into that group. But even deeper than that are the Rosicrucians.
Yes.
Rosicrucians are even a deeper aspect of what I'm talking about.
Well, actually, weren't they part of a spin-off or part of the Knights Templar, the Rosicrucians? Isn't that where their basis came from?
The Rosicrucians have even a more secret history than the Freemasons.
Right.
And the Rosicrucian order was every 100 years they go underground and become very, very secret, completely secret, and then they come out. Very interesting history, founded by Christian Rosenkreuz, who was fantastic.
A German fellow, right?
Yes,
yes.
German fellow, and very closely related to the John, the beloved disciple. I mean, it's very interesting when you start to learn that the Gospel of St. John, the same person who wrote that, wrote the Book of Revelations, which is that's a real initiate document. That's fantastic. People don't understand that, but that has all of this information that I'm talking about in it, on the different levels of self-conscious, spiritual self-conscious and awareness.
Well, in order to understand the Book of Revelations without getting spun out into space somewhere, I think it's essential to realize that what we're talking about is about the individual.
Yes.
And what goes on in each of us.
Yes, and the evolution of us all.
Right.
The spiritual development of us all, and that's what the Book of Revelations is about. But then that's also what Christian Rosenkreuz is about. It's also what Rudolf Steiner is about. It's also what Goethe is about. I mean, Goethe has a fairy tale that is the same sort of level of...
Grimm's, or not Grimm's, but the fairy tale is...
I'm talking about Goethe's fairy tale,
yes.
which I don't know how well known that is, but it's a very odd, interesting... but that's a retelling of the Gospel of St. John.
Really?
Yeah, and it's very, very interesting to read this in a fairy tale and see how mysterious it is. But that's what life is about. Life is a very complicated mystery, and if you're hooked into the scientific materialistic view of things, it's filled with errors and it's just a temporary stage in mankind's evolution.
So,
and it was a necessary stage. This was a stage that we've all gone through so that we become a mirror of reality. So our normal self is necessary so that we can wake up in freedom. So it's not doctrine and dogma that wakes us up, it's experience that wakes us up.
yeah, as a matter of fact, doctrine and dogma puts us to sleep, really.
Yes.
Puts us to sleep. Well, you know, with what you're saying really fits with this whole, with the Christ story and with past lives, because that same scenario, when you go back far enough, you find it has been played out more than once. In other words, there's been the child born of a virgin and pretty much the same story.
Yes, and now one thing that we all have to understand is the virgin birth. After all, when you give birth to your own spiritual self, that's a virgin birth.
I've experienced it. I know I've had that same thing, so I understand exactly.
That's not a physical birth. So that these architectural stories you're talking about, yes, everybody who's transformed has gone through a virgin birth.
Right. So you know, when I look at what you're doing and what you've been doing, Andrew, really neat stuff. You know, underneath we all have purposes and motives and things we're trying to accomplish. What's your highest motive for what you're doing?
Well, the truth of the matter is, and this disturbs a lot of people, is to make a living in promoting what we're talking about.
Believe me, I totally understand. I come from the same place.
And that's what I said before. And that's my highest goal, and most people can't understand that because they're either one way or the other. And they either they're upset by somebody trying to make a living in promoting spirituality in the way I'm doing.
Well, they have a terrible time with that idea.
Yes, and you have to remember that even if you're, say, whatever charitable person you want to be, where does that money come from that allows you to stay alive? This is the temptation that Christ was not able to settle. He was able to get rid of one temptation and a second temptation, but not how to make a living. And he didn't want to turn stones into food.
Right.
And that's what it is to be alive. To be human, you have to figure out how to make a living, and what our ambition should be and our goal should all be is how do you make an honest, creative living?
Well, don't you think that the reason for that is how we have separated spirituality from science even, or from regular life, and made it something just totally apart? So we can't. It's very difficult to come together with that idea.
And that's because the economic system we use is based on egotism, which is another thing that I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, so would I.
Egotism is the source of evil. Egotism is a very, very dangerous thing, and people used to be ashamed of being egotistical. I mean,
yes.
People wouldn't brag about how much money they had. So that we have an economic system that's based on greed and egotism, and really what has to be done, and will happen someday, is that it has to be based on love, and that we really work for everybody else. We don't work for ourselves. None of us is singular. None of us is alone. We can't exist alone. That's impossible. So people who think they deserve $50 million a year in income from being a CEO of a corporation or manipulating money, these people are really very severely deceived. And of course, we don't have to worry about them because they'll wake up soon enough when they die.
Well, you know, part of it, I think the real problem with this is that somehow or other, and I don't think it started in our age, it started way back in history, is that we have no personal identity, or not much of a one, and we give it over to how much we accumulate. Gives us our value.
Yes.
And that's a huge problem.
Yes, and that's why the only way around that is not through new laws, and not that I'm against the better laws and so forth, but the way around what you described is to have this self-transformation.
Absolutely.
And there's no other way around it, and that's the way things have worked forever.
Well, you know, and the tough part about that is we can't really teach that, can we, Andrew? We can kind of guide folks in that direction.
That's right. And it can't be done through force, and that's why the Catholic Church, I don't care if they're right about so many things, you cannot force that on people.
No.
You cannot brainwash people with whatever the truth is. People have to discover this themselves. And I say that we've all, through prior lives, have sinned and broken all of the Ten Commandments, all of them.
Many times.
Over and over again. And we learn to bring that into ourselves through these experiences, these terrible experiences that we've had. And that's why you start to realize, in a certain sense, it's a shame to be a human being because we evolve through climbing over others. And once we realize that that's what happens, you start to first of all appreciate who you really are and how you've gotten to where we've gotten, and then you appreciate everybody else, including your enemies. And that's the process of loving your enemies.
You said something very interesting to me in your interview with
Deb Scott. And, you know, I had, I mean, you totally turned my head and my viewpoint with what you said, because I live my life as a servant. I mentor many people. I don't get paid for it, but I mentor a lot of people. I can't say that I don't get value, because I get something from it. We're all pretty much self-centered. But you said that on the idea of coming back and reincarnating, and I'd been looking forward to, okay, let's make this the last life, and what you said was, once you really reach this spiritual place where you could not come back, you want to come back because you want to help others.
Of course, and to be real Christian, how could you be otherwise?
Well, yeah, but now you're talking about real Christianity.
Yes. How could you want to save yourself and have, like these fundamentalists, they want to have themselves saved and everybody else go to hell. What a ridiculous anti-Christian attitude that is.
Well, it's insane. And you know, and if you believe that kind of thing, on some level, you've got to be putting your energy toward it and working toward it.
Yes.
I mean, we don't just, you know, our thoughts aren't just neutral. They actually have force and effect.
That's right. So no, to me, the first thing you'd want to do after you die would be to come back and help others who have not developed further. So, and by the way, you find that way in reincarnation. By the way, you probably would be read yourself. Steiner has given lecture after lecture, 8 volumes of lectures on karma and reincarnation.
Right.
Giving you the laws of karma and reincarnation. And one of the basic laws is how if you love is the answer, no matter what condition you find yourself in. Love is the answer to getting on with your evolvement, your evolution. So you'd want to come back and help others to understand the way the world works.
Well, when you say love is the answer, and I'm totally with you, and the world has we have a love deficiency at this point, but you know, when they talk about love being the opposite of fear, and it absolutely is, and even the selfish-centeredness of you know, making 50 million and driving force, that's all based in fear.
Yes.
And love is the opposite of fear. It's the way out of the whole process.
Yes. And even beyond love, there's a state beyond love where it's
agape.
It's really, well, even beyond that. After all, beyond agape is sacrifice. I mean,
yes.
Sacrifice your life for another. That's the greatest kind of love. Now look at how far removed that is from sex.
Oh boy.
So you see what kind of evolution there is in just discussing love. But
well, what's interesting, you know, is the fact that we need all of these earthly kinds of experiences. I think you said it earlier, you know, like the most important thing, and I heard it as being a spiritual tenet, and I really didn't want anything to do with it at the time, and that's balance.
Yes.
Like you're talking about, you know, one of the things that I really picked up on you, Andrew, and what you're doing is you're wanting to make what you do conform to what you believe.
Yes, of course.
And well, you say of course, but most of the world doesn't do that. You know, they go to church on Sunday and then they leave all that there and go out and do what they do in the workplace. So,
well, when you bring that up, you're bringing up another point, because we're talking about being a real deep individual, and that requires cutting not on purpose, but cutting ties that you've had, say, with your religion or your culture, and then developing new relationships with other people who have found this themselves.
Right.
Find people like this, like you found me, and I found you with Deb Scott and so forth. There are people all over the world like this. Now, with the Internet, this is much easier to do.
Oh, yeah.
People all over the world who understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, we're beginning to connect and actually have a force.
Yes, and that's what this will take. That's exactly what this will take.
So, when I looked at the credentials of your mentors, do you find that you're working more with intellectuals, common people? I don't mean common in any kind of derogatory way, but people who haven't had that higher education, or is there any real median there?
No, there is none. It's really a person who's too intellectual will not be attracted to what I'm doing.
Oh, absolutely. I understand that.
Almost nobody who graduated from the schools I graduated from is interested in what I'm doing.
Just the opposite.
Yes, and then I'd say almost nobody who's still involved with their religion is interested in what I'm doing.
Well, one thing I'd like to tell my viewers that I think is really important, and it speaks really well for the spirituality of what you're doing. Gary Zukav actually recommends your program, and he's written several pretty powerful books. I don't know if you read The Dancing Wooly Master, but how did you come by that recommendation from Gary Zukav?
Well, that's interesting that you asked me that, because when his book came out, and when Elaine Pagel's book came out on
right.
I figured that there was a market for what I wanted to accomplish.
Uh-huh.
So he was very instrumental in getting me started. So in the course on science, I used that Dancing Wooly Master.
Yes.
And the course on Gnosticism, I used Jung and Hesse and Elaine Pagels. And that's when I got in contact with him, and then that's when he endorsed the program as being a really outstanding program.
That's very powerful. I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm going to kind of give a list of things that you say that your program will deliver, and I think they're probably right on. You want super self-confidence. You want to learn really powerful thinking. Do you want to overcome fear and anxiety? And do you want to learn how to forgive? That's a list that's powerful, that everybody should have on their want lists. And I can't recommend. What's your website?
It is www.classicinsights.com.
Very apropos, well thought out name for your website. So Classic Insights is the name of your program.
Yes.
Listen, folks, I really recommend that if you don't do any more, take a hike over to the website, classicinsights.com. You're going to be impressed. Especially if you're involved with spirituality, it's going to give you a viewpoint that maybe you've not had before. And you've been a really great guest, Andrew. I look forward to talking with you. We haven't covered nearly everything I'd like to talk about, but we've got a couple of minutes left here, and I want to offer that to you if there's something that we haven't talked about that you feel is especially important that you'd like to say in that minute or two.
No, just thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you, George. This is a real pleasure for me, too. And then to, again, reiterate to go to my website, www.classicinsights.com, because I'd love to have you as a student, and so would my other mentors who want to have you as a student.
Andrew, thank you. You have a great evening. We're going to say goodbye now. And I look forward to, at some point in the future, if you get around Sarasota, Florida, let's have coffee.
Thanks very much, George. Bye.
Okay. Good night now. Julie, you want to hit the good job. Well, gosh, that was a great conversation. Certainly gave me a new insight, a new viewpoint on spirituality that I intend to pursue. And, the broader that we can get, and the more we can bring this spirituality into our daily life, the more I think we're living the life that we came here to live. So I've got another good guest lined up for next week. Next week, we will be back to our Tuesday night. We've had some changes here. We'll be back to our Tuesday night slot, 9 o'clock. Be sure and come back. We'll have a good time together. In the meantime, don't forget to accentuate the positive and have a fantastic week.